Hello, pilots. Welcome to the Airfax Podcast, the story behind the story, where we go beyond the written word to bring you the voices and experiences behind the articles you read at airfaxjournal.com. I'm Eric Radke, your host and managing editor of Airfax. Today, the heart of Airfax is you, the pilot, and that's where this podcast comes in. Each episode, we sit down with Airfax contributors to hear the story behind their story. What inspired them to write it? What lessons did they take away? And what can we all learn from their experience? So whether you're tuning in from your car, your couch, or in cruise, welcome. And now let's sit back, relax, and join us for the Airfax Podcast, the story behind the story. Welcome to the Airfax Podcast. I'm your host and Airfax editor, Eric Radke. Today on the podcast, we're happy to be visiting with Joel Turpin, who wrote a very popular 2024 article, in fact, one of our most popular articles of that year, entitled The Captain is Lying, which we're going to ask Joel all about to get the story behind the story. But first, a little about Joel. He began his flying career soloing in a Piper Cub as a 16-year-old high school student, earned his private pilot as a senior, and then went on to earn his commercial and CFI as a 19-year-old college student. He's been an active pilot and flight instructor ever since. He spent 5 years as a captain training officer and chief pilot for a commuter airline, where he flew the DC-3, the Beech 18, and the Beech 99, and served as 6 years as director of training for both Flight Safety International and Simuflight's King Air division. Joel was subsequently hired by United Airlines in 1986, where he flew a variety of Boeings, the 72, 73, 75, and 76, and he retired, quote unquote, which I'm sure he'll talk to us about, in 2015 at the age of 65, of course, the mandatory. He's currently flying as captain and chief pilot on the Pilatus PC-12NG, a beautiful airplane for a company based in Pennsylvania. And in addition, of course, Joel writes flying stories based on these personal experiences, which we've enjoyed for a long time now on the digital pages of airfaxjournal.com. Joel, really appreciate your time and for being with us on the Airfax Podcast. Welcome.
Thanks, Eric. By the way, Eric, before I get started, I was the captain and I wasn't lying.
Let's just get that out of the way. Yes. Keep listening, but he was not lying. Joel, let's get to know you a little bit. First of all, our listeners are always very curious, but let's start with how you caught the flying bug. Tell us about your journey into aviation.
Okay, my flying career really started when my dad was in Navy pilot in World War II. He flew the TBM Avenger from the aircraft carrier USS Enterprise during the war. After the war, he got a job as a sales manager for a company, and they bought him a brand new 1947 Beechcraft Bonanza, which he numbers 21 off the production line in 1947. He flew that till the early 50s. I rode in the back seat, but I don't remember it. My two older brothers do. We all three became pilots. Took my first flying lesson. Well, I got the bug for flying because of that, and also we moved to St. Louis in the fall of 1956. We lived right off the end of runway 24 at St. Louis Lambert Field, and about 3 miles off the end of the runway. And all day, all night, 4-engine propeller-driven airliners had come over my house, either taking off or landing. And I really got involved in airlines, and I said, I want to be an airline pilot. United Airlines did not serve St. Louis in 1960 when I made my decision. But one day a United Airlines plane came over my house. I saw it. And I said, that's what I want to do. I was 10 years old in 1960. And although it took 26 years, I finally got hired by United.
Boy, every kid should have the opportunity to grow up in the shadows of an airport like that. Just amazing views and great airplane spotting for sure. Joel, you soloed is just a 16-year-old. I'm assuming probably the only one in your class, and you did it in that Piper Cub. Take us back to those first solo moments. What do you remember best about that first solo? Everyone remembers their first solo.
I do, sure. It was October of 1966, October 28th to be exact. I was flying a J3 Cub. The company or the flight school I was learning at required us to solo 3 times on 3 different days to make sure it wasn't a fluke before they released us to go solo to the practice area. So my first solo, I mean, I was ready to go. I knew what I was doing, and it was really a non-event. And so I soloed 3 times, and then I was released to the practice area, and that was in October of '66. And then in November of '67, as a senior in high school, I got my private pilot's license. Then in 1969, I got my commercial license and flight instructor rating, and I've been flying ever since. More than 58 years, I've been a pilot. I'd still love to go to the airport and fly airplanes. I just finished flying a 6-hour flight into Pilatus. I'm going to fly again the 6 hours on Sunday. Going to go back down to Key West from Mount Punta Gorda, pick up my boss, and fly him to Mount Pocono, Pennsylvania, where the weather is going to be awaiting us. It's going to be a big challenge, but I still love to fly, and I'm looking forward to it.
Joel, you've had over those years, you've had an incredibly diverse career: small airplane flying, flight instructing, a number of different airplanes for United. Now you're back to business corporate aviation flying. Did you see things unfolding the way they have, or did you were just ready to go fly any airplane that was out there?
That's probably the case. When I saw that first United plane, I said, I want to be a United Airlines pilot. So that was the star I focused on from all through my younger days. Then that kept me out of trouble. I knew I couldn't get into trouble and still get hired by an airline. So I walked a pretty straight and narrow path. And, I just knew I had a career ladder to climb, and every step of the way put me closer to the airlines. And I did everything I had to do: flight instructor, charter pilot, commuter airline, corporate. I flew dead bodies in 6 times. I flew dead bodies in single engine airplanes, freight, mail, passengers, rock groups on tour. Now that was an experience in the '70s.
I bet for sure. Joel, we've been the benefactor of you having written about a lot of these experiences. You're a gifted writer. What inspires you to write? We're so happy you do it, but what do you enjoy about that medium?
I enjoy sharing my flying experiences with others. I think I had the most amazing flying career you could ever have. Starting out in a J3 Cub and ending up in a Boeing 767. I crossed the North Atlantic over 100 times. A lot of things happened, especially in the early days of my career. The early days of my career, when I was flying the Beech 18 and DC-3 and Beech 99, it was for a company that didn't have a lot of money, so they couldn't buy a lot of parts, and we were young pilots flying old airplanes. A lot of things happened: non-radar environment, Midwest weather. A lot of things happened. Um, so I had quite a few emergencies. And then when I got to United, I didn't have any emergencies, but I had a lot of unusual or funny things happen that I thought I'd like to share with our readers. And the reason I like to share my United experiences is because most of the people watching this podcast don't have any idea what's going on ahead of that cockpit door. And so I give them a peek in what we do up there, and hopefully it'll entertain them and open their eyes as what airlines pilots do for a living.
Very true, and thank you for doing that. Now, Joel, writing about aviation, as you know, requires reflection upon successes and challenges. And while you've shared a lot, of course, I'll ask: is there a story or a particular challenge out there that you've hesitated to tell for whatever reason?
I had one incident. Incredibly, the most dramatic emergency of my 58 plus year career happened when I was 22 years old. And I was a brand new instrument rated pilot in Springfield, Missouri, in the South, in the Midwest. Without going into a lot of detail, on my very first cross country flight as an instrument pilot, I got caught in a massive unforecast outbreak of freezing rain in the Midwest, totally unforecast. And to have that freezing rain, you have to have a temperature inversion. So I was flying in the warm air of the temperature inversion. I got to my destination and found out there was freezing rain, and I had to fly an approach into this destination through the freezing rain in a Cessna 172, which obviously was not equipped for icing. And that was led to the most traumatic emergency of my entire career. I had to do things on that flight to save my life and those of my passengers that you could not imagine. I had to violate rules. Of course, I declare an emergency, which gives me the ability to deviate from any regulation or procedure. And in the course of saving my life and those of my passengers, I had to do things. One was to descend 500 feet below the minimum altitude on a procedure turn. Another was I had to turn the carburetor heat off in freezing rain to get more power from the engine. I had reeling the mixture to get the power. Dove down 500 feet too low. Built up my speed, used the speed to get back up above into the freezing level into the warm air loft. Anyway, that was so traumatic. I eventually had to fly a localizer only approach at another airport in freezing rain. And I had to disregard a procedure turn. I had to cross the outer marker 3,000 feet too high to stay in the warm air loft. And I dove down through the freezing level into the icing, clear icing, at redline airspeed, leveled off, and flew for almost 3 minutes to the end of the runway. My windshield was iced over. I was going up 160 miles an hour at redline airspeed when I leveled off. And I just sat at MBA and traded airspeed to hold altitude. And I ended up losing 50 miles an hour in 2 minutes holding MDA. I ended up having to open the side window and look out the side to land the airplane. And that was so traumatic that I pushed it out of my mind for 25 years. I didn't even think about it. And then one day in 1997, it all came back to me and I said, you know what, there's a lot of flying lessons here about being pilot in command and doing anything you have to do, regardless of the regulations, regardless of everything, to save your life. And it was the greatest lesson I've ever learned in my whole flying career. So in 1997, I decided I need to put this down on paper and share it so that nobody kills themselves trying to stay legal in a life-threatening emergency. And that's the only thing.
Joel, wow, harrowing experience for sure. But obviously a lot of great lessons, and you even point out probably the greatest lesson you've learned across those 30,000 plus hours you've been flying. Joel, let's turn our attention to something a little happier, I guess, in terms of you've flown a lot of different airplanes. We mentioned the variety of Boeings you've flown. You're flying that PC-12 now. You soloed in the J3 Cub. Can you pick out a favorite airplane across all those many thousands of hours?
Yeah, thanks for asking. My two favorites would be the J3 Cub because of its simplicity and the fact that you could fly at 65 miles an hour with windows and doors open and stick your face out into the wind and landing on grass runways. And that is about as basic as flying can get. But then on the other side, I flew the DC-3 for 1,000 hours, but the Boeing 757 is probably my favorite, other than the Cub. That is the most capable airplane I've ever flown. It could do everything. It could fly in bad weather. It could take off on short runways, fly long distances, and it was just a joy to hand fly. And I recall one time I had to take off from Orange County, California, John Wayne. The runway was 5,700 feet long, which is really short for a 757. But I had 183 passengers, and I had to make a transcon flight. I landed in Newark. After flying from coast to coast, I got there with 1.3 hours of fuel, and I can't think of any other airplane that could do that.
Wow, that is impressive. And I've heard some other, for airline pilots talk about what a great airplane that 757 was. In terms of flying that 757 around, did you have a favorite airport back in those airline days to go along with the favorite airplane?
Oh, well, I have a favorite, and it's not because it was a fun airport, because it kicked my butt and everybody else's. That's New York's LaGuardia. LaGuardia has the approaches to LaGuardia were difficult. If you're landing on doing the ILS to runway 4, when you were on a short final, you were below the level of the apartment buildings to your left. You could actually look in their windows as you're coming in for landing. And if you had to do a missed approach, the control tower was just off the right side of the runway. And you had to make sure you didn't, do a missed approach in the IMC and hit the control tower. Then we did the Expressway Visual 3-1 approach, and that was one of the few times we got to fly commercial airliners like we would a Cessna or Piper. We got to hand fly them and maneuver, and it was a lot of fun, but big challenge. We crossed some gas tanks in Brooklyn and made a right turn, had to follow the Brooklyn Queens Expressway around past City Field and land on runway 31. It was just great fun.
We're visiting with Joel Turpin on the Airfax podcast, and we'll be back in just a moment. Today's episode of the Airfax podcast is brought to you by Sporty's, the premier source for all things aviation. For over 60 years, pilots have trusted Sporty's for the best in flight training, pilot gear, and aviation gifts. Whether you're a student pilot just starting out or a seasoned pro looking for the latest tech, Sportys.com has everything you need, from top quality headsets and flight bags to ADS-B receivers and even apparel. Sportys.com. Every pilot's journey starts here. Back with Joel Turpin on the Airfax podcast. Joel, you wrote a story, very popular, called "The Captain is Lying and We Can Prove It." And the story really resonated, of course, with our readership. When you first wrote it, did you expect it to be as popular as it was?
I had no clue. I did not know that it would resonate at all. It was just another flying story. It explained something that happened that was kind of humorous and kind of different. But I did not think it would resonate. But again, it does give the passengers a glimpse of what goes on ahead of the cockpit door in a commercial airliner.
So taking us back to that flight, early morning, 6 a.m. departure from Seattle. You were headed down to San Diego, Boeing 757, another day at the office. Anything unusual about the flight in that morning up until when you got the call from the purser?
Nothing. We took off in total darkness, flying almost due south along the West Coast en route to San Diego. And then at some point during the flight, the sun popped up over the Sierra Mountains to our left, to our east. And when the sun first popped up, it bathed the left side of the airplane in bright sunlight, but the right side was in shadow caused by the fuselage. And the passengers in the first class, somebody noticed that they could see the fan in the left engine spinning away, but they look at the right engine because of the shadow. They couldn't see the fan, but they could see the set of stationary guide vanes right behind the fan. And they said, well, the fan in the right engine is not turning. It is on the left engine, so the right engine is not running. So they started this conspiracy theory that the right engine is not running and the captain's not telling us. Well, at those days, we had a thing called Channel 9. At the option of the captain, you could move a switch and allow the passengers to eavesdrop on our ATC communications. I had Channel 9 on. And so anyway, so the flight attendant calls up and says, Joel, the passengers are saying that the right engine is not running. Of course, me and a co-pilot got a great laugh out of that because it was running. And it was burning fuel at 3,000 pounds an hour. We're going 320 knots indicated. So we got a big kick out of it. So I told the flight attendant, so just tell them that right engine's running. It's not, it's a shadow. She called me back and she says, they don't believe you. I said, you mean they think I'm lying? She goes, yes. So will you? So, okay, I got on the PA, explained the whole thing. Okay, here it's an optical illusion. The reason what you're seeing is the fan on the left engine. You can't see the fan on the right engine because of the shadow. And that I guarantee you the right engine's running. If it wasn't, those of you listening at Channel 9 would have heard me declare an emergency and request a diversion to LAX, but you didn't hear that. And I said, the right engine's running. We're burning jet fuel at 3,000 pounds an hour. We're going 320 knots. The airplane's not yawing. And I said, the right engine's running. And that was it. She calls back, she says, they still don't believe you. I thought, what? They don't believe me. They're calling me a liar. I've never been called a liar in my career. So she says, can you send your first officer back? Well, we were descending into LAX's airspace, working with intense ATC, and I didn't want to get rid of my co-pilot. I said, okay, I'll send him back. So he goes back and he tells the first class passengers, here's what you're seeing. And he came back and I said, well, what do you think? He goes, I don't think they believe me. And so we landed. Our normal landing procedure is to land and shortly thereafter clearing the runway, shut down the right engine. This is done for two reasons: to save fuel, and so that when we got to the gate, while the jet bridge is pulling up and they're connecting ground power, the rampers could open the cargo doors on the right side and start unloading the bags while the left engine was still running. But this time I said, you know what? I'm gonna make those people eat their words. And so I left the right engine running, got to the gate, I got on the PA and said, all you people who called me a liar, look at the right engine and watch that. And I cut the fuel to it. And I said, what's the fan on the right engine spool down? So the engine spools down, but by the time me and my co-pilot completed our checklist and came out of the cockpit, all the first class passengers were gone. And I concluded that they were really, I asked the flight attendant, what do you think, what was their feeling when they saw the engine? She goes, it could only be described as crestfallen. Crestfallen, not relief. Crestfallen that they didn't have a story to post on social media and become heroes.
Now, Joel, a classic case clearly of people believing what they think they see versus what reality is. Had you ever encountered that type of skepticism before in your career, and did you ever experience anything like that after that particular flight?
No, that is it. That is the only time. Nobody ever called me a liar again before or after that.
You mentioned, the passengers being disappointed because they didn't have that, gotcha moment or something that they could share with others. So obviously in this day when everyone's taking videos, has that changed how pilots and airline crews interact with the passengers?
Not in my case. No, I think most of us just go up there and do our job. If you do your job right and you're a professional and you take your job seriously, you don't have to make excuses. Even one time I had lost the center hydraulic system on a 757 I was flying, landing in Denver. That's not an emergency. We have 3 hydraulic systems. The only thing different is it's going to take about 10 minutes to lower the flaps electrically, which meant we had to circle around. I was using channel 9. They heard everything. I got on the PA and explained the whole thing. Hey, we lost the center hydraulic system. We're going to have to lower the flaps electrically. That's the only system that's affected. This is not a serious thing. It's just going to take a little while before we could land.
Do you think, Joel, and that by this same token, that we're just in this digital age where everyone's recording, and it's also an era where I think there's much more mistrust, not as much trust in authority in particular. Is this just inevitable, probably, that the professional crews are going to deal with more of this passenger skepticism moving forward?
Absolutely, Eric. And I have a saying. There was an old saying called, and it went like this: "The night has 1,000 eyes." Have you ever heard that?
I have.
How about this? Now, in the 21st century, the night has 1,000 cameras.
Very good.
So everything you do is being scrutinized by our passengers to the nth degree. But so far, nobody after that incident ever had an issue. And of course, now I just fly my boss and his family around, so we're not flying the general public in the Pilatus. But that was the only time.
Now, this ended up being rather lighthearted moment. I'm assuming there were no legitimate safety concerns, but has there been a time, when passenger paranoia, so to speak, has elevated to the, concern of safety?
Maybe a few times, mostly in turbulence. People are afraid of turbulence. And we get into moderate turbulence and they're bouncing around back there and they think the wings are going to fall off. But that's not true. The airplanes are stressed amazingly strong. I can't think of any commercial airliner that has been broken up in turbulence. I may be wrong about that, but it's not a common thing. So that scares them. That scares them a lot.
Now, during that time, all those passenger interactions from the early part of your career to when you were forced into retirement at 65 at United, did the passenger behavior change? Did they become more anxious? Were they better informed? Did they become more vocal?
Well, Eric, I can only describe it this way. They become more cynical. And like you said, they trust no one. Everybody has become, and thanks to the internet, everybody has become an expert on things they know nothing about, like flying airplanes. And they trust no one in place of authority because, obviously people of authority have abused it and they've been caught. and they trust no one, including airline captains, which I found out
Yeah.
firsthand.
Now, I'm sure you have a long list of other anecdotes that you could share, but I'll ask it anyway. Are there a couple of other funny or even strange passenger interaction moments that come to mind over that time at United?
At United, yes, I had one flight from Chicago O'Hare to Los Angeles at 4 p.m. departure in a 767-300. We took off and leveled off from cruise flight, heading west. And about an hour or so into the flight, maybe an hour and a half, flight attendant called on the interphone with a complaint. She said, "Now the 767 cabin configuration, seating configuration is 2 seats against the windows, an aisle, 5 middle seats, an aisle, and 2 seats against the other window. There just so happened that the 5 seats in the center at I think row 27 or some row was a family, a wife and husband and 3 kids. Well, the wife was sitting on the left in the left seat against the left aisle, and she had a complaint to the flight attendants. And the complaint was that the young couple sitting across the aisle from her in the window seats, the man had a blanket in his lap, and his girlfriend had her head under the blanket. What should she do?" And I thought, "Uh-oh, I'm the captain. I got to solve this. What do I do?" So anyway, I said, "You know what? It's a customer service problem. It's your job. That's what you do for a living." Uh, I said, "You handle it." And it's, that was about the funniest thing I ever saw at United. I just told her, I said, "Listen, you got to tell them that they got to stop doing that." Well, anyway, to add to the story, so we landed at LAX. We're at the gate. We deplane, and me and my 2 co-pilot and the 5 flight attendants are walking through the terminal and to the hotel bus. And one of the flight attendants said, "That's them." And I looked forward, and there was a guy walking, and there was a girl behind him about 10 feet. And I swear they'd know each other. She goes, "That was them." And they were holding hands. They weren't walking side by side. She was behind him. And I thought, I don't think they know each other. Anyway,
Oh, the craziness, the craziness.
that's California.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Joel, is there anything that comes to mind if I were to ask you what was, one thing about airline operations that you wished all the passengers understood or knew?
Um, Delays. The delays are not the airline's fault. Delays are the fact that there's too many airplanes and too little airspace, and sometimes the weather is perfect at the departure airport. Like, for example, even flying the Pilatus, I will get a ground delay in Mount Pocono, Pennsylvania, an uncontrolled field on a mountaintop, going to Key West because the sector over Jacksonville, Florida is saturated. And we will get a wheels up time at an uncontrolled airport flying a private airplane. Maybe an hour, maybe 2 hours. I've had 2-hour ground delays because of saturation in the center airspace at high altitude. And I wish they would understand that usually it's not the airline's fault. Sometimes it is, but most of the time delays are not because of the airline. I mean, of course, obviously if there's a mechanical delay, that's brought to their attention.
Joel, this has been a great conversation. We mentioned the many articles that you've written that are available at airfaxjournal.com. How about something that might be in the works? Are you able to preview for us any storylines, any ideas that come to mind that you might be working on?
I'm just getting ready to send you one, Eric. I wrote it a while ago, and it is entitled, "How Did You Do That?" And I will send that to you shortly. I've got a couple other ideas for new stories, but I will send you that one. There was another one that I'm going to send you. It's called, "That's the Airport, All Right, but Nobody Lands There."
Joel, we're looking forward to it for sure. Joel, as a final question, a question we ask all of our Airfax podcast guests. What's the one piece of aviation wisdom that you would pass along to a new pilot?
Never stop learning. I'm 75 years old. I've been flying for over 58 years, and my ears are wide open to anything new that I need to learn. So keep learning. Do not think you know everything. I mean, there comes a time after about 1,500 hours or so where you think you know everything. Hey, I got 1,500 hours. You don't know everything. The other thing is take flying serious. I notice a lot of young pilots, flying is just what they do. Um, but my generation, flying is who we were. And there's a difference between aviation being who you are and being just something you do for a living. And we're seeing a lot of incidents and accidents today that reflect that people aren't taking flying seriously. And I'll tell you what, the sky's a very unfriendly place. And if you don't do your homework, you don't do your pre-flight planning, you don't do your training, you don't discipline yourself, you're gonna end up in a YouTube video you don't want to be in.
Joel, that's great advice. And, on behalf of the entire Airfax readership, we hope you keep writing about these stories. They're wonderfully entertaining. They're chock full of great lessons. So we certainly appreciate it. We're with Joel Turpin on the Airfax podcast. Thanks for joining. Joel, thanks for being a great guest. And again, we look forward to more articles.
Okay, Eric, I'm going to send one today.
Bye now.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Airfax podcast. For today's show links and all of the podcast episodes, visit airfaxjournal.com/podcast, where you can also sign up for our free email newsletter. Again, that's airfaxjournal.com/podcast. We'll see you next time.